In this video, I demonstrate how to blend student acrylics like oils. I use Liquitex Basics to paint the still life of a flower sifter and an apple. I use nothing but the acrylics to paint the majority of this painting. The exception is that I use retarder to blend the background, and I demonstrated how to use glazing medium on this apple. This video is kind of long, but there are timestamps in the description below. Aside from blending, color mixing is important so that your colors are accurate. That makes your image look more realistic. I'm using the Liquitex Basics. The basic colors I'll be using are phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, quinacridone magenta, pyrrole red, transparent yellow, and titanium white. I might use Mars black, but we'll see how this goes. There's other colors in here I could use as a shortcut. Maybe I'll use the burnt umber to mix some of the grays. I think maybe this stripe would be a good place to start. So I'll mix some basic neutral colors and then I'll start filling it in. I like the burnt umber because it makes it super easy to mix grays. So it's just like burnt umber and some ultramarine blue. Can't see what I'm doing, so I add a little bit of white to it. This is really dark, so I'll add more white. One thing about blending is if you get the colors right, then it makes it easier. So I'm noticing this is too cool. I'm adding more quinacridone magenta to it. It has to go lighter. Maybe I'll mix up half of it so it's lighter. It seems like there's more magenta in the photograph. The thing about working from like a printout like this too, it's not as bright or as vivid as like looking at it on a computer screen, so I could probably mix these colors a little bit more saturated if I wanted to. Okay, we're getting closer there. This stripe isn't a solid color. It's darker on the left side and lighter on the right side. Plus there's some subtle things going on there, but I could put that in later. This color is close to being the color on the right. That's a highlight, and then I'll mix a darker color for the left. I figure I'll just use this color on the left here. I think maybe a little bit more blue and some of the magenta. Definitely needs more magenta. To keep your paints wet on the palette, you can just use a mister like this and give it a mist once in a while. I also have this larger one that puts out a much bigger spray, but it's really fine, and when you press it down, it'll spray water for like a full second. Or you could do short little bursts like that. Okay, so that's a little too purple. I'll add some of this transparent yellow in here, and that should make it a little bit less vivid. Maybe that's too dark. Let's see what we get here. Yeah, I still think a little bit more magenta. I've got 3 different shades here. I have the darkest shade, which will be for the left side. I could use that in the middle, and then it'll be the highlight. Here's my drawing. I first drew with like a light colored marker. These are acrylic markers. I really don't recommend using something like a Sharpie because that might bleed through your paint when you paint over it. I have a whole video about how I use markers like this to do the preliminary drawing. There's a link to it in the description below. Basically, it allows me to just keep drawing without erasing because the first colors are so light. And then when I want to refine it, I go back in with like a raw sienna, like this brown color, and then I can go over it with black for the final drawing. Putting some effort in the beginning saves a lot of time in the long run because it's much easier to make corrections in the drawing than trying to paint over some area that you already painted because you already mixed those colors and it takes a while to put that in there. Drawing is so much faster. I'm using a basic nylon brush. This is nothing special. You can buy these at craft stores or online. I'll start by putting in the color on the right side. And this looks really dark because there's no color around it. I'm working on a white board, and so it makes it look even darker, but when I put the other shades in here, it'll start to look right. The thing about acrylics is they dry quickly, and one thing that I do sometimes is what I call band blending, where you just paint in the colors next to each other without blending them, so you end up with like these bands of color like this. And then you could just go back in and soften where they meet. So here's the middle section. Then I'll grab some more of the white color. And that already starts to look like it's blended in. Then you could just pick up some of the lighter color and go in on the highlight side. I sort of broke this up in sections. I'm doing this top part, and then I'll do this part, and then I can put the sections in below here. So I'll grab some more of the middle color and some of the darker color. I'll continue on to this dark section right here, and it would be tempting to use pure black, but I think there's color in there and it's a little bit lighter. So if I brush some of this Mars black on a scrap piece of paper, you can see it's darker than that color, especially at the bottom here. It gets a little bit more purplish, whereas the black is pretty much neutral. So one way I might be able to get there faster is to start with the black and add some of the ultramarine and the magenta and a touch of white to make it lighter. I still think it needs more color in there. Went a little bit too light. So if I put that next to this, it still needs more color. That's why I like to mix the dark areas from colors, because you don't make that mistake of going too neutral. But I'll just add more blue and magenta and I should be able to get close to that. So putting this in, I realized that I went too dark on this initial stripe here, and I'll have to go back in and lighten that up. The very edge of this has a darkness to it, but I think it lightens up towards the center. So it looks better now that it's a little bit lighter. I think maybe I'll add a little bit more white to it. This dark edge is still wet, so I can take this lighter color and slowly make my way over there. Right there, that just softened that edge. There's a lot of little subtle streaks of this lighter color. I think I could probably use this color right here to put those in there. And then I think these darker sections are pretty close to what this is. I might have to adjust it a little bit. So I'll spend some time doing that. I think this has some red in it because it's reflecting the background. So I'll work on all this next. As I said in my other video about blending acrylics, that painting a reflective surface like this is just drawing out the abstract shapes, matching the color, and then filling it in. It sounds simple, but it takes some patience. I think people are often looking for like one secret for blending acrylics, like maybe there's a specific brush or blending technique that will do it. But I would say it's a combination of things. And that would be, for one, being able to mix colors accurately, because if you don't get the color right, it doesn't matter how well you blend it, it just won't look realistic. What makes things look realistic is getting at least the value right, the lightness and darkness of it. But if you can get the color accurately and you place it in the right spot, it starts to create the illusion of depth. And I'm trying to create the illusion of this being shiny or reflective. Chrome is very difficult to paint because of that reason. You have to look at it and be able to draw these abstract shapes and not get too lost. And then you have to be able to see what these colors actually are rather than what you think it is. So you might think of that as being gray, but I can see there's a lot of blue in there. You can learn how to mix colors by watching my color mixing videos here on YouTube, but I also have a course. There's a link to it in the description below. The other thing about blending acrylics is you can create the effect of blending it like oils by building up layers, and I'll show more of that later. You don't need to blend quite as much as you think you do. I think people overblend their paintings. If I look at this photo, there's quite a bit of like hard edges here. The gradients are like in the background where this goes light to dark, and like I said, in this stripe, this is light, this is dark over here. And there's a lot of that in these reflections. There's like slight gradients in the handle. So really that makes things easier for you. I've got most of this blocked in. I think I'll go in and try and clean up these edges. They're real wobbly and stuff. And the other thing too, I always recommend is turn the board however you need it to get in there. So it's much easier for me, because I'm right-handed, paint this edge upside down. It doesn't really matter. You got to think about it as you're painting in shapes. You can do that whether the painting is upside down or right side up. The other thing about working upside down like this is that it forces you to see the actual shapes. And that's because you don't really see the subject as easily when it's upside down. So you can see the relationships between these shapes easier when you don't recognize what it is. I'm going to put in some of this background color just so I have it up along this edge, and that'll help me to like judge these colors a little bit better. So I think it'll be mostly parallel red, and to make it darker, I'll add ultramarine blue to it. Might need a little bit of magenta in there. I think it needs more blue. It should go a little bit lighter. It looks too dark. I think that's too dark. I'll add a little bit more white into it to test it out. I think that looks pretty good. Same thing, I'll paint this side upside down. See, I can get the bristles right up along the edge like that, whereas when you paint this way, the point is like facing away from the edge you want to paint. If you paint on a smooth surface like this, it helps to have softer brushes. That way it's not scraping the paint off the board, which creates a lot of streaks. This color might be a little bit too dark, but it's hard to tell until I put the color in next to it. So I figure I'll mix this warm color up next and start to fill it in. If I need to make adjustments, I can always lighten this stripe here. I think this is a good color to start off with. I could always adjust it as I go. This brush is a little bit softer than those nylon ones, so it does lay the color down a little bit better. You see how this makes that color look lighter? I do think though that I have to adjust this side of it a little bit, and I'll do that later. Some areas where that gets lighter, so I'll add a little bit of titanium white to it. Maybe a touch of yellow. I don't care that this right side is all jagged. I could just paint over that with the next color. Since acrylics paint dry so quickly, it does help to sort of come up with a strategy where I'm going to work on this section. So if acrylic paint's dry within 10 minutes, you got 10 minutes to get this section all blended. If it starts to get too dry, you can mist it with water, but it's kind of risky. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll let it dry and come back and paint over the top of it. And that often helps because if the paint's a little bit streaky, the second coat painted over a dry layer will help make that look more solid. For the first layer of most paintings, you just block in the shapes and you come back and refine it. So that's the main color here for this stripe. Then it reverts back to like a cool gray color. So I'll work on that next. I think I can use this color that I mixed originally and just add a little bit of ultramarine blue to it to make it cooler. That's for like this section here. So this is like a soft edge, and the way that I normally do that is I'll paint in a stripe like I said before, and then just sort of work that in to the wet edge. See how that's softer? And notice I'm working in sections here. So I did this top section, and then I'll come down here and do the bottom section. And this is still kind of wet, so I want to get that in there while I can. So I painted a hard edge right up alongside of it, and then you just go in there and soften it. It might help to take some of the paint off your brush, just so that it's like bare bristles. And you can work some of those colors into each other. You can even do like little circular motions, and then paint straight down. The circular motions will mix the two colors together, and then you can just go over it like this to smooth it out. This edge should be softer too. This is all wet. This side is mostly dry. What I can do though is pick up some of that color and blend it in there. Then you just paint it right down the middle. I wiped off my brush, and then I could pick up some of this color straight as it is and paint it on the left side. That way I could smooth it in there and it looks much softer. The key is keeping it wet, and you can add like retarder to your paint. Maybe I'll show you how to do that later in the video, but I feel like I wanted to show that you can blend acrylics without adding anything to them. It's mostly just techniques. It's not like there's some magic thing you can do that all of a sudden they'll blend like oils. It helps to gain experience with these different blending techniques, and then you know when to implement them. And a lot of times it might be a couple different techniques that will make it look like it's much smoother. So a lot of times it's a matter of just like dipping into another color. That way you can blend the two together. For example, that's a little bit too light, but if I were to pick up some more of the darker color, maybe some of this even, then go back into it, it does help. So here's a darker color. So this white stripe does get darker towards the bottom. I can keep adding more of this dark color to it and just work it in there. And then come up along the sides too, because that will help soften the edge. See how that looks softer? I might as well put this wood color in now just to finish off the bottom of the mug. Just a basic brown color. It does get lighter over on this side here. So I'll add more white into that. And there's like a white highlight here too. This is no different than the other sections. I just put two colors next to each other and work them into each other. I'm going to work on the handle of the flower sifter next. I have some of the basic colors from the main part of it, and I could just block that in pretty quick. It's interesting because you think there'd be a lot of blending in some of this, but really this part right here is like one main color. The blending happens like right here at the bottom where this transition is. So I'll have to soften this edge, and there's a little bit of that happening at the top too. I pretty much worked this the same way I worked the main part of the flower sifter. So I'll speed through this and I'll come back and show you how I refine the blending to make it look smoother. I think that's the one main tip that I would give for blending acrylics is people try to do it in one layer. I think they stop short. If you come back and glaze over it and make some minor corrections, it starts to look even better. So I'll just do this handle real quick and then go from there. One of the challenges of blending acrylics is that they dry so quickly. One way to rectify that is to use some form of retarder or a slow drying medium. I have a retarder from Golden. This is the Winsor Newton slow drying medium. There's slow dry gel additive from Liquitex. And they also have a fluid version of that that's more liquid. So if you want a thinner paint, you can use that instead. The one thing to keep in mind is something like this slow dry medium. This actually has gloss gel in there and they added retarder to it. So you can add as much as this to your paint as you want and it won't affect it too much. Now that's different than retarder because retarder is just the additive that makes it dry slower. So if you add too much, this might dry tacky. So it's important to read the directions and they tell you how much you can add. So in this example, do not add more than 1 part retarder to 1 part paint. And that's the golden retarder. Other ones have different percentages. You have to just read the directions. For this example, I think I'm going to use just the retarder. And then in other areas, I might use something like the satin glazing liquid to do thin transparent washes over parts of the painting. So for example, I'll squeeze some of this out, put a little bit out here for each color, and mix it in. So here's the other color. I'll add some of that retarder in there. I think I could probably use a little bit more. Now if you wanted to keep it thick, you could use the gel, and it's pretty close to being the thickness of the paint. So here's that other trick where I have these 2 colors I want to blend together, but I'll make a middle mixture. It's somewhere in between. So what I'll do is I'll start on the left side, use the darkest color, and then as I work my way over, I'll work some of this middle color into it. That just makes blending a little bit easier. As for the brush that I use, this is a really cheap watercolor brush. It's from Princeton, and it's like one of those mop brushes, and it's got soft bristles. It works pretty well for doing like circular blending. The only issue is that like when you wash it out, the bristles sort of clump together and you really have to dry it off before you can use it for blending again. I also have some of these natural hair brushes that are softer, and that helps too because it doesn't drag the paint off the board or the canvas. Whereas if you have like a hog bristle brush, those bristles are stiff and they create like scratch marks in the paint surface. I forgot to hit record when I was blending this, but the good news is I put a second coat on here, and that's where I really demonstrate how to blend acrylics using retarder. That's coming up. There's a timestamp to it in the description below. I think I'll put in the wood color real quick. There's not much variation in it, and I don't think it has to be that accurate, so I'll just put that in real quick. So I have this brownish wood color mixed up, and that works pretty good for the background part of the table. I might soften this edge where the background meets the table, but I'll just put the color in for now. And it's pretty much the same color over here. It only gets lighter in the foreground, so that makes it easier. So for the foreground, I think it's a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit more yellow. The thing about the retarder, like I said, is it makes it a little bit thinner, so it does seem a little bit easier to blend. All right, I'll fill in that section and I'll probably let this dry. I took a break and then I mixed up 3 colors for the apple. Basically, it's the dark area, this lighter red section, and the green. Actually, it's 4 when you include the white highlight color. I didn't add any retarder to these colors. It's such a small area, I could easily just blend these together. I've got the dark section filled in, and now I can start working in this lighter color. Since I already have the dark color on my brush, it's kind of already blending those 2 colors together for me. Put the lighter color in here, and you can see there's a hard edge there, but if I take a softer bristle brush, I could just work those into each other. So that's much softer now. I'll keep going back into this lighter color, and it should get lighter as I move up. In fact, I might have to wipe the bristles off, pick up some of that color fresh off the palette. That is a little bit lighter. Again, when I first put this dark color in here, it seemed too dark, but as you eliminate the white, it starts to make more sense. And I can carefully blend it into this section here so it looks smoother. You can easily change colors without rinsing your brush. I just wipe that off and the bristles are pretty clean. I'll paint in this yellow-green color of the apple skin. So here's that color right here. I probably mixed up way too much of it. It's starting to dry up a little bit. I'll start in the middle where the color is pure. Then I can work it into the red color. It's not very opaque because of the yellow. It's the transparent yellow. So I might have to do more than 1 coat for this. The color that I'm blending it into will be this lighter red color that I mixed up. And I can put that at the edges. I think some of that even goes into this part here where there's like a little bit of texture. I think that'll work better as like a second layer rather than trying to do it in one pass. There's also some of that color up here. It's not quite as bright, but if I mix some of that red in there, it should match pretty close. I'm also using this lighter color for the edge of the apple. The skin gets lighter and more greenish. This is the highlight color. It's kind of surprising. It's like a grayish color, but if you use pure white, it would probably look too bright compared to the apple. So you can kind of see there's the white of the board, and then this is quite a bit darker. I got that pretty much blocked in. I have a layer of color on the entire painting, Now I'll go back in and refine it. I think I'll start with the background. It shouldn't take too long to do this. And this is the color that I added the retarder to. The gradient will start off as like a dark burgundy color over here, and it'll turn more red as I get over to the right side. I'm probably going to make this edge of the table softer. I don't want the viewer's eye to go directly to this hard edge right here. And this is really streaky. I just threw that color in real quick. It has to go much darker, like by the handle over here. And then there's a light section for reflection from the silver. Here are the colors I have mixed up. This is the lighter section, which is on the right. And I did make it a little bit lighter. I think that the print is lighter. It's not too bad. There's a lot of glare on this, but it's pretty close to that color. So I'll just brush that on real quick. As I move up, I'll start switching to the darker color. So there's this middle color. You can see that's quite a bit darker. It's a similar strategy that I use for most blending, where I'll lay the different colors in and then I soften up the area where they meet. I have a number of soft brushes that I use. This one is like a watercolor mop brush. I've used this before. And these are just like soft brushes. These are nothing special. I'll just do some circular blending, see how that works. I'm trying to do is introduce those two colors into each other to create like a third shade of this color. I could drag the dark color into the light color. You kind of have to work quickly. I mean, there is retarder in here, but you don't want to spend too much time overworking this. So that's not too bad. Maybe I'll drag some of that color down a little bit and then go across. When that happens, you drag some of the light color in there by accident and you got to work it out. Not too bad. Then I'll continue on with that middle color. Once I have that down, I can start working in the darker color. Here's the darker color. It's quite a bit darker. I'm just brushing that in. I think maybe it should go more like that at a diagonal angle where it blends in with this other color. I'll just keep picking up the darker color and it should get darker as I go. The tedious part is painting around this handle of the flour sifter. But I'd like to get this corner filled in before I start working on that. All right, so I'm going to wipe my brush off because I want to get the darkest color and I don't want this lighter red to make it lighter. So this is the darkest color. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but this is a little bit darker than that section right here. I'll make sure that I put the darkest parts in first before I start blending into the rest of it. I do think that if I look at the photo, it's like this top left corner that's the darkest, and it does start to get a little bit lighter towards the table. So I'll keep that in mind as I'm working here. Picking up some of the lighter color so I can work it into this area right here. And I think I'll lay it down a little bit thicker just so that it'll stay wet longer. That's another trick for keeping acrylics wet longer is don't work so thinly because thin layers dry much faster than thicker layers. And when you reuse this soft mop brush, it's best to wipe off the paint that was on there before so you don't contaminate your colors here. Let's just see if I can soften this up a little bit. So I did circular motions and then I go back and forth. It's not too bad. Then I'll wipe the pigment off and I can go back and try and smooth it out a little bit better. I could call this done, but I think there's a lot of refinements I can make to this. I'm seeing like a lot of like waviness in some of these lines, and I can make some of the blending a little bit more subtle. And that's where acrylics really come through, is that you can put as many layers on here as you want. And you can put thin layers over thick and vice versa. I'm going to work on this apple and refine it a bit, and I figured that would be a good opportunity to show you how to use glazing medium. I like using the golden satin glazing liquid. I like the fact that it's satin so that it blends in with the satin finish on acrylic paint. Liquitex also has slow dry medium, and you can use that for blending. But the one thing I don't like is that it's glossy, which stands out when you only use it in a small part of your painting. So for example, if I use it in this apple will be a lot more glossy than the rest of the painting. I'm not sure if they have a matte version of this, but that's why I use the golden version. I'll just squeeze some of this out onto my palette, and then that way I can just dip into it when I need it. I got most of this flour sifter done. I might come back to it and touch up some small things, but now I'll work on the apple. I have all the colors blocked in, but it needs some refining. I feel like this color could go a little bit more green, and there's more subtle textures in the skin that I can add in there. I cleaned up my palette a little bit to make more room, and I added some of the satin glazing medium to it. This was the original color that I mixed up, and I added just a little bit of ultramarine blue in there just to make it a little bit more greenish. And I can add some of this glazing medium in here. That way it'll stay wet longer. Yeah, I think that's a little bit more accurate. Here's some of that other apple color, and I can work it into that area too. That way I have two sections that are wet, and I can smooth them out into each other. So I'm just dipping into whatever color I think I need. So here's a little bit of that yellow-green color, and I'm blending it into that wet area that's pinkish. And then if I need more opaque color, I just go right into that color without adding any glazing medium to it. So that's basically how I approach doing subtle effects like this. Try to keep both sections wet, and you can dip back and forth between the colors. It's not exactly like working with oils, but it does make it a lot easier to blend these colors together. The other benefit of the glazing medium is that it makes the paint a little bit thinner, and it doesn't leave any bristle marks. Sometimes bristle marks get in the way of creating like a realistic effect. So you can already see this section looks a little bit more realistic. I'll work on this for a bit and I'll come back and do other sections. Here's what the apple looked like before, and this is after I added more layers using the glazing medium. So I tweaked a few areas. I redid the background because I wanted this to be a little bit lighter and more red. I also softened the edge of the table and reworked the wood. I didn't want too much wood grain in here. I want the attention to be on the flower sifter and the apple. Here's the finished painting. I changed the background so that it's more red, and I decided to leave some of the brushstrokes in there. I also softened the edge of the table so that your eye goes more towards the flower sifter and not so much towards the hard edge of the table. Up next, you can watch my other acrylic blending videos. Thanks for watching.